Good evening from the comforts of my own dining room. I'm not Chris Wallace of Fox News, although I think he did an admirable job on the debate given the circumstances, and I'm going to welcome you to the debate that you wish you had. This is going to be, I don't know, it's going to be whatever segments I feel like, but I will in fact address all the topics that Joe Biden was asked to address. But this time, Trump won't be interrupting every step of the way. And I won't have a stutter. And I'll have watched the entire debate. So, I can take cues from that. I'll have a couple of advantages. What I won't be doing, though, is reading off any kind of script or even preparing ahead of time. I'm not going to have statistics up my sleeve like I'm sure both of the candidates had. Well, one of the candidates had. I'm just going to be saying whatever comes to mind. Unlike just now, where you notice there was a cut. But that's all right. Starting now, I'll be the moderator, but I'll also be representing the Democratic Party and how I think the debate could have gone. Our first subject is the Supreme Court. Vice President Biden, you say that this is an effort by the president and Republicans to jam through on an appointment in what you call an abuse of power. My first question to you tonight, why are you right in the argument that you make and your opponent wrong? And where do you think a Justice Barrett would take the court? President Trump would go first, but he's not here, so I'll let you go. It is an abuse of power because, number one, it is so incredibly close to the election date. Now, in the actual debate, the real Biden said that the election had already started, votes had already been cast. To me, that doesn't matter. It just matters that the decision hasn't been announced yet as to who is president. And there's still a month left in the term of President Trump. There's a month left for him in the Senate to appoint a Supreme Court justice, and he did take advantage of that. So, to me, on the one hand, that's fair play. On the other hand, it's sort of gross. The Republican Party already managed to put through a different Supreme Court justice, one who actually had a hearing about sexual assault and acted extremely unprofessionally and immaturely. I'm not happy with that, and I don't think most Democrats are, and it feels pretty skewed to have two different Supreme Court justices appointed within a 4-year term. I understand why Vice President Biden is upset about that. I also think it was very childish of President Trump to say, well, we won, so we can do what we want. To me, that's a mark of how much of a game this is to him, and how much he does whatever he can to get whatever he wants. So, in conclusion, I think it was legal, it was following procedure, and it feels so wrong to have another justice appointed by the Republican Party. Another issue that complicates things is that the selection of a justice, in this case, does not seem particularly accidental, let's say. Joe Biden mentioned that the new justice had already written an opinion that she'd like to tear down the Affordable Care Act. She thought it was unconstitutional, so it's no coincidence that President Trump, who's been trying to tear down that exact piece of legislature, would choose her to be the Supreme Court justice for life, I might add. And it seems like a betrayal of the trust that the president holds when he or she or they are asked to pick a Supreme Court justice. This is going to be the same person that's in office in 20 years when the Affordable Care Act is worked out in some way or another. And it seems petty and in bad faith to choose a Supreme Court justice to serve your immediate partisan needs. the discussion, of course, turned to the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Now, it was brought up that President Trump doesn't have any sort of coherent plan to replace the Affordable Care Act after repealing it. As far as I can tell, this is absolutely true. He has no intention of replacing the Affordable Care Act whatsoever. He just wants to repeal it and then make people feel good. At least the expansion of Obamacare and the replacement of the parts that are now missing under Biden would mean that more people got health care. And people that couldn't pay for it got health care. Trump called him a socialist. I don't know about Biden. He seems pretty moderate, but I'd love to be called a democratic socialist. I voted for Bernie in the primaries. I'd love to see us have socialized health care. It turns out lots and lots of really successful countries have socialized health care. And it works great. Of course, every healthcare system will have its problems. But, for example, I went to the hospital this month. All I did was walk in. They took my temperature to make sure I didn't have COVID, put a blood pressure cuff on me, and then as soon as I saw the nurse, she asked me like 2 questions and said, "Yeah, nobody can see you right now. You might as well go home." And they charged me over $200 for that visit. Something's clearly broken there. And something needs to be done to fix it. And I think that thing is taxpayer dollars paying for taxpayer healthcare. To me, it's a human right. And I think any steps toward that are for the better. All right. The second subject is COVID-19, says Chris Wallace, already fed up with these shenanigans, which is an awfully serious subject. So let's try to be serious about it. We have had more than 7 million cases of coronavirus in the United States, and more than 200,000 people have died. Even after we produce a vaccine, experts say that it could be months or even years before we come back to anything approaching normal. My question for you, the representative for Joe Biden, is based on what you have said and done so far, and what you have said you would do starting in 2021, why should the American people trust you more than your opponent to deal with this public health crisis going forward? The question goes to you. Honestly, I was just fine with the way this went in the debate, for the most part. Like Biden said, Trump has discouraged wearing masks. He's held huge rallies, and though they are outside, they do not in any way conform to social distancing. Huge crowds that he bragged about are great ways to spread the virus. Other than that, I think Biden made a good point about trusting Dr. Anthony Fauci and not trusting Trump. When they started talking about trusting or not trusting scientists, Kamala Harris's stance came up, and I think it got a little bit confused. The Kamala Harris quote was something like, "Scientists will be muzzled." And I think that got misinterpreted. I assume that what she meant is, under Trump, scientists will be muzzled. They will be muzzled by the Trump administration because Trump does not want to accept that there is a severe pandemic that he has to deal with. He would rather tell everybody that things are just fine and bask in the glory of their praise instead of treating the problem as a real problem, the way that it actually is. So the scientists that would be muzzled are still trustworthy. They're just not able to speak. And Joe Biden does, in fact, address this by saying, look, there's also lots of scientists that are not under Trump's sway, that aren't paid by him, they're not on his payroll, and they don't answer to him, and they're saying the same thing. Wear a mask, stay inside when you can, even though it feels like, to quote Trump, being in prison. Don't go to huge rallies and gather in huge crowds. And No amount of hand sanitizer and masks will make up for huge packed stadiums full of crowds. That's ludicrous, and any scientist could tell you that if they weren't too busy being. Chris Wallace chimes in again. Okay, when it comes to how the virus has been handled so far, the two candidates have taken very different approaches, and this is going to affect how the virus is handled going forward by whichever of you ends up becoming the next president. I want to quickly go through several of those. Reopenings. Vice President Biden, you have been much more reluctant than President Trump about reopening the economy and schools. Why, sir? My answer is going to be similar to the one that Biden gave, which is this. Safety from coronavirus is important. Yes, it's important to go back to our daily lives and to restart the economy. Yes, it's affecting people, but coronavirus is sickening people, it's killing people. By the way, it may have long-lasting effects even if it doesn't kill you. We're not sure, but we've seen evidence that that could be the case. So our top priority right now should not be getting back to business as usual. It should be controlling the coronavirus. Because if you open quickly and without thinking, then you'll have to close again. Even if restaurants are open, it doesn't mean people will go if they're likely to get COVID. At some point, it's not feasible. Many other countries have had to deal with this issue. In fact, pretty much all of them. And the ones that have been successful didn't reopen frivolously before cases had fallen. They were careful. They did the things that we're not doing, that President Trump could not, for the life of him, figure out how to do. They were testing, which Trump didn't want to do because it would make the numbers go up and it would look bad for him because more cases would be reported of coronavirus. Not to mention that individual states were bidding over supplies with each other. There was contact tracing. There was a concerted effort to stop the virus from spreading, to contain it, before we talked about reopening. If we reopen too early, then this problem keeps going and going and going. The coronavirus reproduces. There's not a finite amount of it. If we don't control it and isolate people who have it until they don't have it anymore, it's just going to keep spreading. Even if one person or one family has coronavirus and then they go out unhindered and spread it to everybody else, guess what? There's going to be another coronavirus outbreak. So we need to get a handle on the coronavirus before we get a handle on our economy. I think the smart thing to do would be to use taxes that we collected or collect new taxes from those that can afford it in order to pay stipends to people that can't afford to buy anything now because they're out of work. We did that a little bit. I'm not entirely sure on the details, but I heard there was a huge holdup in Congress over some kind of bill that included coronavirus stimulus as well as other things like mail-in voting support. And the Republicans fought tooth and nail against that because they thought the Democrats were trying to pull one over on them. But that's another story. It wasn't really covered in this debate. It's just one of my pet peeves. So thanks for bearing with me on that one. But I think the answer is, yes, having a bad economy hurts people, but having loved ones die of coronavirus also hurts people, and I'd say it hurts people more. The economy will be able to grow once the coronavirus crisis is under control. At this point, the discussion turned to, you guessed it, Trump's taxes. He apparently had been paying only $750 in taxes, despite being a billionaire. He, of course, wouldn't own up to it and claimed that he was paying millions and millions of dollars in taxes, but nobody had seen his tax returns yet. They would just have to wait. Joe Biden made the point that actually well, I kind of did this in the wrong order. But no going back. I said it was real time. So Trump did make the point that the tax code allowed for it. And at the time, he was a private business person with no interest in politics. So why should he put the welfare of the nation over his own private welfare? It was totally legal. I do understand that point. But I think at some point, adding tax dodge upon tax loophole so that you pay the same amount of taxes as a school teacher, that's just ludicrous, and something should just put up a little red flag in your brain saying maybe this isn't ethical, like maybe this wasn't the rules as intended, but simply the rules as written. And although it's technically legal, I think especially for somebody that aspires to be the President of the United States, or rather is the President of the United States, really you need to take some accountability for what the laws intended and what's best for the nation. Chris Wallace says, I'd like to ask you about your plans going forward because, Mr. Vice President, your economic plan interrupted by Trump. If you were to be elected president, focuses a lot on big government, big taxes, and big spending. I want to focus first on the taxes. You propose more than $4 trillion over a decade in new taxes on individuals making more than $400,000 a year, and on corporations. President Trump says that that kind of an increase in taxes is going to hurt the economy as it's just coming out of a recession. I was wondering about this. I'm actually taking an economics course right now, and I think that even coming out of a recession, taxing the rich won't hurt as much as you might think it would. Here's my guess on what might happen. I would assume that people that are very, very rich have a lot of savings. And so when they die, for example, they'll have gone their whole life without spending all of the money in their pocket. And it'll go to somewhere. It'll go to wherever their will takes it. For example, their kids. But the point I'm making is, if there's $1 million sitting in someone's bank account, that's not being spent. That's not going to pay for the wages of the people that made the product or provided the service. That's not in the economy, it's just squirreled away. And so I would think that if that's coming out from under the mattress where all that money had been sitting, figuratively, and it's going into taxes, which are going into things like roads or healthcare or schools or new green energy, that's actually stimulating the economy. And that the recession isn't really hurting people that are very rich because they have this buffer of savings. They're not living paycheck to paycheck. And the people that are really need the help. Chris Wallace now says in exasperation, let's please continue on. The issue of rice. Yes, this transcript says the issue of rice. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to say the issue of race. Vice President Biden, you say that President Trump's response to the violence in Charlottesville 3 years ago, when he talked about very fine people on both sides, was what directly led to you to launch this run for president. My question for you is, why should voters trust you rather than your opponent to deal with the race issues facing this country over the next 4 years? Mr. Vice President, you go first. Honestly, I don't have much to add to this. I think Joe Biden did a fantastic job outlining the issues, and the issues specifically were that, yes, Trump is pretty obviously racist. He refused to condemn literal Ku Klux Klan members. Very fine people on both sides, he says. And in the later part, which we'll get to, I'm sure, he was saying that racial sensitivity training were awful, terrible ideas. Yeah, I'm getting the feeling that he's pretty racist. I have to believe that pretty much every African American voter watching that debate is now not going to vote for Donald Trump. And possibly going to vote for Joe Biden. I'm holding out hope for that one. All right. As Chris Wallace again, I would like to return to the question of race. Vice President Biden, after the grand jury in the Breonna Taylor case decided not to charge any of the police with homicide, you said it raises the question whether justice could be equally applied in America. Do you believe that there is a separate but unequal system of justice for blacks in this country? Again, Biden made some very good points. I don't think I could say it better than he did. He said most police are generally good and fair people, at least consciously. Internalized racism is really all over the place. I have it. You probably have it. It's a mess, but most police officers are not the kind of people that would put their knee on somebody's neck until they stopped breathing. Most police officers are the kind of people that would watch that happen and be frozen with indecision and not know what to do. And so Biden says, let's get everyone together and let's deal with this. Yes, let's keep people accountable. Let's have some way of reporting other police officers for behavior like this. Let's figure out something. As far as systemic injustice and racism, yes. Yes, there is systemic injustice and racism. And if you ignore that this is happening, then you're kind of part of the problem. President Trump is at best completely oblivious and at worst blatantly racist. I'm betting on the latter. But in his later comments, he talks about America being an awful country and that's what accepting systemic racism is trying to teach us, that by teaching these courses where we teach racial tolerance, we're saying, oh, we're such a terrible country, we treat African Americans horribly. Well, the answer lies somewhere between those two visions. Yes, it is a pretty good place to live for some people some of the time. Our country's pretty awesome in a lot of ways, and in a lot of other ways, it's pretty messed up. You can tell it's pretty messed up when police officers are killing innocent people. You can tell it's pretty messed up when job applications that have a white name on it are more likely to get accepted than those that have a black name on it. You can tell that it's messed up when white people have been known to threaten to call the police on black people that weren't really doing anything just because they didn't like their behavior. These are problems. They're real problems, and to acknowledge them doesn't mean our country is awful. And to ignore them means that our country is no longer equality for everyone or the land of opportunity. It's just the land of opportunity for some. Chris Wallace says, I want to get on to another subject, which is the issue of protests in many cities that have turned violent. In Portland, Oregon especially, we had more than 100 straight days of protests, which I think you would agree, you talk about peaceful protests, many of those turned into riots. Mr. Vice President, you say that people who commit crimes should be held accountable. The question I have, though, is, as the Democratic nominee, and earlier tonight you said that you are the Democratic Party right now, which I think was a great comeback to, here's what Bernie Sanders said, here's what your friend said. Anyway, but have you ever called the Democratic mayor of Portland or the Democratic governor of Oregon and said, hey, you got to stop this, bring in the National Guard, do whatever it takes, but you'd stop the days and months of violence in Portland? I do have an opinion on this. And my opinion is, this is more delicate than you would think. I do like Biden's answer to this, which is there wouldn't be so much violence if Trump wasn't always stirring the pot. But I think the real answer to the question of why not call in the National Guard, why not do whatever it takes to stop the violence, is that this isn't just regular crime for regular reasons. Yes, of course, the people that are committing crimes, looting stores, setting things on fire, rioting, of course they should be held accountable, but they're also part of a movement. They're part of an image, and it creates the image that the government is the bad guy and is the enemy if you bring in the National Guard and have them running through the streets trying to put down the protests. Even if they are violent protests, and even if they should be broken up, it would be better to do it in such a way that the government doesn't come across as saying, we don't hear you, we don't agree with you, we don't understand why you're angry. I think there should be some movement, some way for the government to say, look, this has to stop, we're going to stop it, but we also want you to know that we hear you, that we understand why you're angry, because you have been oppressed for a long time. This isn't new, and this isn't a small deal. This is a big deal, and we get it. It's treating people that commit crimes not as criminals, but as people that are upset. And you shouldn't be able to go around committing crimes and wrecking the city because you're upset, but this won't stop until the problem stops. I actually went to a Black Lives Matter protest. It was a peaceful protest. We just held signs and walked in the streets shouting slogans, and one of those was no justice, no peace. As in, until the black community gets justice, you will not get the peace that you crave. There will be protests, and heck, maybe there will be riots. And that's not a good thing, but the riots are still a way of saying, listen to me, I'm angry, you have to do something. And if you crack down and say, screw you, you're nothing to me, and I'm going to do with you whatever I want, that is the wrong message, and it will lead to more violence down the line. Chris Wallace has a very good question now, which is this. When the president seeks a second term, it is generally a referendum on his record. But Vice President Biden, you'd like to quote one of your dad's sayings, which is, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And in this case, sir, you are the alternative. Looking at both of your records, I'm going to ask each of you, but mostly Biden in this case, why should voters elect you president over your opponent? I am going to start by quoting what Biden actually said, which is, under this president, we have become weaker, sicker, poor, more divided, and more violent. And I think all of that is true. I totally agree with Chris Wallace's sentiment saying that Biden is the alternative. I think there were a lot of people on the Democratic primary list, and a lot of them didn't win. Biden did. But for me, at least, Joe Biden may not be the person that I truly want to be president if I had my pick out of anyone. But he's not Trump. You know what Trump is? Biden said this. He's a clown. He has no qualifications, doesn't know what he's doing. He throws around buzzwords, but he doesn't know what they mean. He's mean-spirited, he's racist, and not only that, he's completely stupid. That just sort of slipped out of my mouth, but it's true. He makes no actual effort to do the job that you're supposed to do as the president. He just follows what other people say, and if you pay him enough money, he'll do what you want. This isn't a nice thing to say, but it's the truth. And I wouldn't say it about almost any other president. I really don't know enough to know whether I would say that, but he is, in fact, the worst president the United States has ever had, in the sense that he just hasn't done his job. He's worked to fill the pockets of himself and his friends. He's worked to tear our society apart, pitting us against each other. He has completely mishandled the coronavirus pandemic. He's just not doing a good job at being president. In fact, he's not really doing a job at being president. Joe Biden has been in the White House for 8 years already as the vice president to Barack Obama. And that administration, in my opinion, went extremely well. As Biden mentioned, Obama inherited a recession, and him and his vice president made it better. And then, of course, Trump did all the stuff that Trump did, which Biden also mentions. But the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, Biden will be a president. President Joe Biden is going to do something. And it's not going to be divisive, and it's not going to be racist, and it's not going to be poorly thought out for the most part. And he's not going to be mean-spirited. He's not going to interrupt other people when they're trying to talk for an entire debate. It'll be refreshing to have an actual adult in office if, or hopefully when, Biden wins. If I had to guess at Trump's age based on the way he acts, it would be approximately 4.5, and a particularly badly behaved 4.5-year-old at that. And I'm not trying to call names. I'm just making the most accurate comparison that I possibly can. And I don't think anyone watching this is going to disagree with me, because, heck, let's face it, it's a world of echo chambers, and you're probably all liberal, progressive Democrats anyway, or some flavor of those words. If you're not, well, I'm glad you're looking into the mind of somebody that thinks a little different than you for a change. I know it's kind of hard to actively seek out different viewpoints, and I'm not being sarcastic, at least not on purpose. I just think that it's really easy to read about and watch about and listen about opinions that you already agree with, and it's much harder to soak up some of the stuff you're not as comfortable with. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I know you don't agree with me on everything that I've said, because that'd be pretty difficult. Everybody has different views. I think I still have a couple questions left, so I'll get to that. But in case you don't finish the video, I suppose, thanks for watching. On to the next question. So the only thing here that it says under the line for Chris Wallace is, I'd like to talk about climate change. And it's approximately that tone of voice, because he just had to interrupt an interruption fest between the two candidates. He is some kind of superhero. That man... Look, dealing with Trump is not great at the best of times, and when you have to directly argue with him and tell him that he can't just talk for as long as he wants, that's the worst of it. I saw Joe Biden crack and start saying things he didn't mean to around 20 minutes. Chris Wallace lasted another 10 or 15 minutes after that before actively being snippy. And boy, is he good at getting Trump to shut up. Or at least he doesn't knuckle under. So props to Chris Wallace. Also, especially because he works for Fox News, I would not have expected that. Fox kind of has a reputation for being right-wing biased, but he didn't seem biased at all, and didn't seem to favor Trump any more than Biden. So honestly, Chris Wallace is my new role model, and I have to officially declare that Chris Wallace won this debate. With that said, he goes on to ask, forest fires in the West are raging now. They've burned millions of acres. They've displaced hundreds of thousands of people. When state officials there blamed the fires on climate change, Mr. President, you said, "I don't think the science knows." Over your 4 years, you have pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. You have rolled back a number of Obama environmental records. What do you believe about the science of climate change, and what will you do in the next 4 years to confront it? Donald Trump's response to this was fascinating. It really shows what must be going on in his mind. Because he said, "I want crystal clear water, immaculate air, immaculate water. I want a beautiful climate for everyone." And then he said, "Well, we need our industry to make the economy good. We need," I don't know, he's saying something about cars. I don't know what he was saying about cars. But he definitely was saying, of course we don't want to be in the Paris Climate Accord because it's holding our country back. Because we could do so much more without those pesky restrictions. But I'm still working for perfect, pristine air and water. And I'm just sitting here thinking, it doesn't work that way. And I'm not sure that you understand that. What Joe Biden wants to do is a lot more realistic. And yes, it's going to cost some money, right? There was the thing about jobs. I don't think there's going to be a problem with jobs because it will, like he said, create new jobs if we try to create new sources of green energy and do things like, it's not weatherproofing, but insulating houses so that they're more energy efficient. There will be jobs created in that market. And so the jobs lost to coal workers or oil workers hopefully won't be a problem. Some people might need to retrain, which is always a thing that makes people unhappy and uncomfortable, but the number of jobs should stay the same or grow. As to the fact that it will cost money, taxpayer money, well, yeah. But this is the trade-off that you have to make. If you want clean air and clean water, it doesn't come for free. And you're going to enjoy it. Your kids and your grandkids and their kids are going to enjoy it. And so, yeah, maybe it's worth the investment, even if you do have to pay up. So that's what I have to say to the budget concerns. I know that Republicans tend to be more low taxes and low services and low government intervention, and Democrats tend to be higher taxes, higher services, higher government intervention. And so that's really where that divide comes in. But, it is going to cost some money to have a clean environment, but it's going to be worth it. Because if things keep going the way that they are going, I'm not that optimistic. I've seen pictures in some Asian countries of people walking around wearing masks, not because of coronavirus, but because of pollution. I don't want that to be my city or my country, and I'm willing to pay for that. The last topic that Chris Wallace has for the candidates, I'll just paraphrase it, but it's, how will we have a free and fair election during COVID and with the complications that have come up? How are we going to make sure everyone can vote and everyone's vote will be counted? Well, my biggest and first answer is you guys. You are responsible for making sure you vote. It is important. I know if you're watching this that you may have already filled in your mail-in ballot. You may have a complete plan of how you're going to do it, but it's going to be hard this election cycle to vote. No thanks to President Trump. He's intentionally making it hard to vote in the hopes that more Democrats won't vote than Republicans. I honestly think he's hitting some of his own people with this, so we'll see how it goes, but vote, and not only that, figure out exactly when and exactly how you're going to vote. I have, and it's taken me a while, literally until a couple hours ago, to know exactly when and exactly how I was going to vote. restrictions are different in every state. It's kind of ridiculous, but if you want your voice to count, that's what you have to do. What is Trump going to do about it? Well, he's going to do his absolute best to make sure that the people he doesn't want to vote won't get to vote. He's made it hard to vote by mail. He's said don't vote by mail, and then he has made his claims true because he kept saying it was going to be fraudulent. It's not going to be fraudulent. What it is going to be is slow, because Trump has made a point of defunding the post office just in time for a big mail-in election. Coincidence? Well, you decide that. But what it does mean is, if you are certain you know where to drop off a mail-in ballot, you should fill it out and then drop it off. If you don't, send it in and send it in soon. If you really have to go in person, then go if you think that it's safe. The lines may be a little bit long, it may be strange or uncomfortable to vote during COVID, and I won't tell you what decision is right for you. I'm 21. I know what the decision would be for me if I didn't have my mail-in ballot already. I'm hopefully going to volunteer to be a poll worker if they ever get back to me. But, right, if you're my parents' age, or even older than that, I don't know what to tell you. I know what I would tell President Trump, though, which is knock it off. And that's all there is to it. Get out and vote. And vote early if you can, because the more votes that are available right away, the more legitimate it's going to seem when Biden wins. Because if he wins, but his votes are the last to be counted, well, then it gets easier for Trump to say, oh, well, it was rigged. He's already saying it was rigged. He said it in this debate. And it's totally not fair that anyone should have to cross these hurdles in order to get their vote to count and in order to have a free and fair election. But that's where we are right now. And if you've waited all your life to be a hero and to do something really patriotic that you didn't have to do, well, now's your chance. Because you can tell people in 5 years, if you ever have kids or if your kids have grandkids, say, I voted during COVID-19 under President Trump. With all the stuff that was going on, I figured it out and I voted. And that makes you pretty darn cool. Chris Wallace, out. Hope you enjoy that debate that you could have had. Good night.